This story is inspired by real-life situations and includes fictional elements for entertainment. Not recommended for viewers under 18.
The kiss lasted 8 seconds. 8 seconds between a janitor and a billionaire. 8 seconds that would cost them their reputations, their safety, and almost their hearts. Chicago in January felt like punishment. The wind whipped between the glass towers of downtown, rattling scaffolding and biting through layers of wool and regret. At 10:47 p.m., Lucas Bennett stood alone in the executive lobby of Stonewall Holdings, pushing a grey mop across marble floors that reflected chandeliers worth more than his annual salary. He moved quietly. He always did. At 38, Lucas had learned the art of invisibility. The security guards barely looked at him. The executives barely noticed him. His uniform, navy shirt with maintenance stitched over the pocket, functioned like camouflage. But invisibility had its advantages. No one asked questions. No one saw the exhaustion in his eyes. His phone buzzed in his back pocket. He dried his hands and checked the screen. Emily Bennett. "Daddy, did you pack my inhaler in my backpack?" Lucas smiled softly. He typed back. "Yes, Peanut. Front pocket. I love you. Go to sleep." 3 dots appeared. "Love you more." His chest tightened in that familiar way. Not panic, not pain, just responsibility. Emily was 8, sharp as a blade and fragile as glass. Asthma attacks came without warning, usually when Lucas was at work. That was why he worked nights. That was why he scrubbed toilets in a building where board members debated stock acquisitions worth billions. Because daytime meant doctor appointments, homework, warm dinners bought with coupons. Because once he had worn a different uniform. Once he had been the one running into burning buildings instead of cleaning up after powerful people. Lucas locked his phone and returned to work. Upstairs, on the 38th floor, Vivian Sterling stood alone in her office, staring out at the Chicago River glowing black beneath the city lights. At 42, Vivian had mastered stillness the way others mastered charm. Her reflection in the glass was immaculate. Tailored charcoal suit, diamond studs, posture straight as a verdict. CEO of Stonewall Holdings. Net worth $3.4 billion. Wife. The last title felt the heaviest. Her phone screen lit up with a notification from a political news outlet. A photo of her husband, Richard Sterling, shaking hands with a senator. Headline: Sterling's Senate run gains momentum. She didn't smile. Richard had not come home before midnight in weeks. When he did, he carried the scent of ambition, and sometimes something sweeter, unfamiliar. Vivian walked back to her desk and opened a small amber bottle. Beta blockers. Prescribed for stress-induced arrhythmia. Just until things calm down, her cardiologist had said. Things never calm down. She swallowed one pill dry and closed her eyes. Downstairs, Lucas wheeled his car toward the elevator bank reserved for executive floors. Cleaning the top levels took precision. Mahogany desks, crystal decanters, private art collections issued for absurd amounts. He pressed 38. The elevator hummed upward, smooth and silent. When the doors opened, the floor was dark except for one office glowing at the end of the corridor. CEO. Lucas hesitated. Usually, she was gone by now. He began with the conference room first, wiping fingerprints from the glass table. He worked methodically, but something felt off, like static in the air before lightning. A thud echoed faintly from down the hall. Lucas froze. Another sound, softer this time. He stepped into the corridor. "Hello?" he called out cautiously. No response. He approached the CEO's office. The door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, he saw a silhouette on the floor. For half a second, his brain refused to process it. Then instinct took over. He pushed the door open. Vivian Sterling lay collapsed beside her desk, one hand curled near her chest, eyes closed. "Ma'am?" Lucas knelt beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No pulse under his trembling fingers. Time fractured. Training, buried but not gone, surged back. He positioned his hands over her sternum and began compressions. 1, 2, 3. Her skin was cold, her lips tinged faintly blue. "Come on," he muttered. "Stay with me." 30 compressions. He tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and hesitated only a fraction of a second before sealing his mouth over hers. Breath. Another. Her body remained limp. Lucas resumed compressions, sweat breaking across his forehead despite the winter air. He didn't see the security camera in the corner of the office. He didn't know that 8 seconds of his mouth against hers would one day be slowed down, zoomed in, dissected by millions of strangers. All he knew was that he refused to watch another person die in front of him. Not again. On the third cycle, she gasped, a sharp, desperate inhale that sounded like resurrection. Lucas nearly collapsed in relief. Vivian's eyes fluttered open, disoriented, frightened. She focused on the face hovering above her, a janitor in a navy uniform, eyes fierce with urgency. "You're safe," he said hoarsely. "I've got you." And for the first time in years, Vivian Sterling believed someone meant it. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Lucas leaned back on his heels as reality began creeping in. He had just kissed the most powerful woman in the building, to save her life. And somewhere, unseen, a red recording light blinked steadily in the dark. The first thing Vivian Sterling felt was pain. Not the sharp kind, not the cinematic kind. It was heavier than that, like something had pressed a stone into the center of her chest and forgotten to remove it. Then came the sound, the voice, low, urgent, counting. 27, 28, 29. Her body jerked under pressure. Her lungs burned as if she had been underwater too long. Somewhere above her, fluorescent light fractured into halos. Lucas Bennett didn't notice the way his hands trembled. He only knew the rhythm. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. He had sworn he would never do this again. The last time he had knelt over someone like this, the air had been thick with smoke. The roof had collapsed before backup arrived. His partner, Danny Ortiz, had not come back up with him. For years afterward, Lucas had replayed those final seconds in his head, wondering if his compressions had been too shallow, his breaths too late. Tonight, there was no fire, no sirens yet, just a billionaire on a polished hardwood floor. "Come on," he whispered. "Don't make me lose another one." He tilted Vivian's head back again. Her perfume, subtle, expensive, faintly floral, mixed with the metallic scent of fear in his mouth. He sealed his lips over hers. Her mouth was colder than he expected. The kiss, if it could be called that, was mechanical, urgent, clinical, survival passing from one body to another. In the corner of the office, the security camera recorded everything without judgment. The angle framed them close, his large hands played against her jaw, her hair fanned across the floor like dark silk. Lucas pulled back and pressed his ear near her lips. Nothing. He began compressions again, harder now. 1, 2, 3. Downstairs, security officer Mark Delaney glanced at the monitor wall lazily. The executive floor camera flickered with motion. He squinted. "Why's maintenance up there this late?" he muttered. He leaned forward, turning up the contrast. On screen, the janitor was bent over the CEO. Mark straightened in his chair. "What the hell?" Upstairs, Vivian's body convulsed suddenly. Air tore into her lungs with a violent gasp. Lucas froze. Then she coughed, once, twice, rolling onto her side as oxygen flooded back into her bloodstream like fire. "Oh, thank God," Lucas exhaled, his entire frame sagging. Vivian's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. The ceiling lights felt like interrogation lamps. She inhaled again, shallow and confused. "Where?" Her voice was barely sound. "You passed out," Lucas said gently. "Ambulance is on the way." She blinked at him. The first thing she registered was not his uniform. It was his eyes. They were not the kind that lingered, not greedy, not opportunistic, just terrified. For her. She shifted slightly, and pain shot through her ribs from the compressions. "You," she whispered, realization dawning. "You were..." "CPR," he said quickly, almost apologetically. "You weren't breathing." Her lips parted faintly. For a split second she felt the ghost of his mouth against hers. Not romantic, not chosen, but intimate in a way that bypassed logic. Sirens wailed louder now, echoing through the winter streets below. Security burst through the office doors first, followed closely by paramedics. "What happened?" one of them demanded. Lucas moved back immediately, hands raised slightly as if surrendering. "She collapsed. No pulse when I checked. I started CPR." The paramedics worked efficiently, attaching monitors, sliding an oxygen mask over Vivian's face. Her gaze never left Lucas, even as they lifted her onto the stretcher, even as they wheeled her past him. Their eyes locked one final time before the elevator doors closed. And in that silence, something shifted. Not desire, not yet. Recognition. Downstairs, Mark Delaney replayed the footage 3 times. From a distance, stripped of sound and urgency, it looked different. The janitor leaning over the billionaire, his mouth on hers, her body still beneath him. 8 seconds frozen in digital clarity. Mark leaned back slowly. He wasn't malicious, but he was bored. Underpaid, recently divorced, and bored man with access to servers made dangerous choices. He copied the clip onto a flash drive. Probably nothing, he muttered to himself. But he didn't delete it. 3 hours later, in a private hospital suite overlooking Lake Michigan, Vivian regained full consciousness. Monitors beeped softly in the dim room. Her assistant, Claire Whitmore, stood near the window, pale with anxiety. "Vivian," Claire breathed when she saw her eyes open. "Oh my God, what happened?" Vivian asked, voice steadier now. "Cardiac arrhythmia, severe reaction. They think the beta blockers interacted with the new medication." Vivian swallowed slowly. "Who found me?" Claire hesitated. "Maintenance." A flicker crossed Vivian's face. "The janitor," Claire clarified. "Lucas Bennett." Vivian repeated the name silently. "Lucas. He saved your life," Claire added quietly. "The paramedic said if he'd waited even 2 more minutes..." Vivian closed her eyes briefly. She remembered the pressure on her chest, the force of breath entering her lungs. She remembered not feeling alone. That unsettled her more than the medical diagnosis. Meanwhile, across the city, Lucas sat at his small kitchen table, staring at his hands. Emily slept down the hall, her inhaler resting safely beside her bed. The news hadn't broken. Not yet. He should have felt pride. Instead, he felt exposed. He had crossed the boundary tonight. Social, invisible, dangerous. He had touched a woman who existed in headlines and shareholder meetings. He had pressed his mouth to hers under fluorescent light. He told himself it meant nothing. It was procedure, protocol, survival. But as he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, he felt again the fragile warmth returning to her body under his hands. And somewhere deep inside, beneath years of caution and restraint, something long dormant stirred. Not desire, not yet, but possibility. In the security office, Mark Delaney opened his personal email account. He attached the video, his finger hovered over send. He imagined the clicks, the speculation, the attention. He clicked. Across the digital landscape of Chicago, a file began its quiet journey into the wrong hands. By morning, 8 seconds would no longer belong to just two people. They would belong to the world. By 6:12 a.m., the video had a headline. By 6:12, it had a narrative. By 6:12, it had a verdict. Janitor kisses married billionaire CEO in locked office. The footage was grainy but intimate. Security angle. No audio. Just fluorescent light and proximity. Lucas bent over Vivian's body, his mouth pressed to hers, her stillness beneath him. 8 seconds. On social media, it looped endlessly. The captions came quickly. This doesn't look like CPR. Gas maintenance comes with benefits. Stonewall CEO caught cheating. By 9:15, the clip was trending on X. By 9:15, morning talk shows were dissecting it with red circles and slow motion. No one mentioned cardiac arrest. No one waited for context. In a modest apartment 20 miles from downtown, Lucas was pouring cereal when his phone began vibrating non-stop across the kitchen counter. He frowned. Unknown numbers. Text messages from coworkers. A voicemail from Human Resources. His stomach dropped before he even opened the first link. The thumbnail froze him in place. It was his face, tilted downward, close to hers. Daddy? Emily stood in the hallway in unicorn pajamas, hair tangled from sleep. Lucas locked the screen instantly. Nothing, Peanut, he said too quickly. But children in 2024 did not need explanations from their parents. They needed Wi-Fi. By 10:12 a.m., a classmate had shown Emily the clip on a phone under a desk. By recess, 3 girls had asked if her dad was stealing someone's wife. By lunch, a boy had laughed and said, "Your dad's gonna be rich now." Emily didn't understand adult scandal, but she understood shame. When Lucas arrived at school after receiving a call from the nurse, "She's having trouble breathing," he found his daughter curled in a plastic chair, inhaler clutched tightly in her hand. Her cheeks were blotchy from crying. He knelt in front of her. "Hey, look at me." She refused at first. Then she whispered, "Did you do something bad?" The question hit harder than any headline. "No," he said firmly. "I saved someone's life." She hesitated. "But they said you were kissing her." Lucas swallowed. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "saving someone looks different than what people think." She searched his face for doubt. She found none. And that was enough for now. Across the city, Vivian Sterling watched the same footage on a muted hospital television. The loop replayed while a news anchor's lips moved dramatically. Her husband stood near the window, arms folded. Richard Sterling was handsome in the way polished marble was handsome. Cool, controlled, carved by ambition. At 45, he carried the posture of a man already rehearsing victory speeches. "You're trending," he said mildly. Vivian didn't respond. She watched the angle again. The way her body lay limp. The way Lucas's shoulders were rigid with urgency. "They're calling it an affair," Richard added. Her jaw tightened. It was CPR. Richard turned slowly. "That's not how it looks." There it was. Not concern. Optics. "Do you think I staged my own cardiac arrest?" she asked coldly. He exhaled through his nose. "I think you are careless. Alone with a male employee after hours? You are smarter than this." A pulse of anger flickered through her veins, stronger than any arrhythmia. "I was unconscious." "Yes," he said evenly, "and now we have damage control to manage." He stepped closer to the bed, lowering his voice. "My campaign team is already fielding calls. Donors don't like scandal, especially not moral scandal." Vivian studied him carefully. No outrage, no jealousy, just calculation. "You don't seem surprised," she observed. Richard's expression didn't change. Surprised by what? The speed of the leak? A pause, too brief for most people to catch. Not too brief for her. At Stonewall Holdings, the board convened an emergency virtual meeting. Vivian joined from her hospital bed, dressed in a silk robe, hair immaculate despite the IV in her arm. On-screen squares filled with concerned faces. "Vivian," said Thomas Calder, senior board member, "this is unfortunate timing." Unfortunate. As if she had scheduled cardiac failure between quarterly reports. "It was a medical emergency," she replied calmly. Lucas Bennett performed CPR. Thomas adjusted his glasses. Public perception doesn't differentiate. Another board member chimed in. "We need a statement distancing the company from any impropriety." Impropriety. Vivian felt something sharp and clear crystallize inside her. "The man saved my life," she said. "There will be no distancing." Silence followed. Public companies did not survive on gratitude. They survived on narrative control. "We'll issue a clarification," Thomas conceded. "But until the story cools down, perhaps you should limit appearances." Translation: disappear. Vivian ended the call without promising compliance. Lucas did not receive a board meeting. He received a suspension, pending investigation. Human Resources used words like protocol review and policy boundaries. He signed papers with steady hands. On his way out, co-workers avoided eye contact. A few stared openly. One whispered, Man, you're either a hero or an idiot. Lucas didn't answer. Outside, winter wind slapped his face as if trying to wake him from a nightmare. His phone buzzed again. A private number. He almost ignored it. Almost. Mr. Bennett? A female voice asked. Yes. This is Claire Whitmore, Mrs. Sterling's chief of staff. She would like to speak with you. His breath caught. For what? To thank you. The simplicity of it startled him. After a day of accusation and humiliation, gratitude felt almost suspicious. When? He asked cautiously. Tonight, discreetly. He glanced at the skyline where her building pierced the clouds. Discreet. Nothing about his life felt discreet anymore. That evening, Vivian stood alone in her hospital room after Richard left for a fundraiser. She opened her phone again, scrolling through comments beneath the video. She always looked cold. Rich women get bored. Poor guys about to get sued. She stopped reading. For decades, she had controlled every headline about herself. But this was different. This was personal. She replayed the footage one more time. This time, she didn't look at herself. She looked at him. The urgency in his movements, the way he didn't hesitate. There was no hunger in that kiss, only desperation, only refusal to lose her, for reasons that had nothing to do with romance, and everything to do with humanity. Vivian lowered the phone slowly. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar rising beneath the armor she wore daily. Not attraction, not yet, but indignation. Someone had turned survival into scandal, and she had a growing suspicion that the leak was not random. Outside, snow began falling over Chicago again. Soft, relentless, indifferent to reputation. Inside, two separate worlds, a janitor and a billionaire, felt the same thing at the same moment. This was no longer about 8 seconds. It was about what those 8 seconds would cost. The hospital discharged Vivian Sterling 3 days after the collapse. The official statement called it a temporary cardiac episode exacerbated by stress. The unofficial narrative still lived online, looped, zoomed, dissected. By Friday evening, the trending tag had shifted from scandal to speculation. But speculation had teeth. Lucas Bennett arrived at the address Claire Whitmore had texted him with measured reluctance. It wasn't the hospital. It wasn't Stonewall Tower. It was a private art gallery in River North, closed for the night, discreet. He stood outside for a full 30 seconds before going in, gloved hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. Inside, the gallery lights were dimmed except for track lighting illuminating abstract canvases that probably cost more than his apartment building. Vivian stood alone near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the river. No security detail in sight. No husband, no board members. Just her. She wore a simple black sweater and tailored slacks. No diamonds tonight, no armor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. You shouldn't have come, Lucas said quietly. Vivian turned. You shouldn't have saved me, she replied. A faint, unexpected smile touched his mouth despite himself. That's not how it works. No, she agreed softly, it isn't. Silence settled between them, not awkward, but charged. I wanted to thank you properly, she said, without cameras. Lucas shifted his weight. You already did, through your assistant. That was protocol. She stepped closer. This is not. He noticed then that she looked smaller outside the hospital bed. Less untouchable. Human. You had no pulse, he said, as if defending himself again. I followed training. You didn't hesitate. That landed differently. He met her eyes. People hesitate, she continued, when it's inconvenient, when it's risky. It wasn't about risk. She studied him carefully. Then what was it about? The answer came before he could censor it. Not losing someone again. The air shifted. Vivian didn't ask what he meant. She could see it in the tightness around his jaw, the way his shoulders carried something invisible and permanent. Firefighter? She guessed quietly. He nodded once. My partner, he said, years ago. She didn't say I'm sorry. She said, you still carry him. Yes. Not defensively, just truth. Vivian walked toward a nearby painting. Bold red strokes slashed across white canvas like controlled violence. I built Stonewall after my father died, she said, voice low. Everyone thinks it was ambition. It wasn't? It was fear, she glanced at him, of being irrelevant, of being replaceable. You're neither. The words came naturally. He didn't realize the weight of them until she inhaled sharply. You don't know me, she said. I know what it looks like when someone doesn't sleep, he replied. When someone runs on pressure instead of rest. That surprised her. Richard never noticed her exhaustion. Board members noticed numbers. Lucas noticed the shadows under her eyes. A dangerous awareness flickered between them. She moved closer again, close enough that he could smell her perfume, different tonight. Softer. You're suspended because of me, she said. Because of perception, he corrected. And your daughter? He stiffened slightly. She'll be fine. Children aren't collateral damage, Vivian said, more to herself than to him. He watched her carefully. You don't have children. It wasn't a question. She shook her head once. We tried, she admitted, years ago. The words hung heavier than the scandal. He didn't offer comfort. He offered presence. That kind of loss, he said quietly, stays. Yes. They stood too close now. The gallery felt smaller, the silence thicker. Outside, snow dusted the river walking pale light. You know what they're saying, she said after a moment. I've seen. They think it was an affair. He gave a humorless half smile. Would have been the least efficient way to start one. The joke broke something fragile open between them. She laughed, soft, unguarded. It startled them both, because laughter implied ease. Ease implied connection. Connection implied danger. I should clarify publicly, she said slowly, more forcefully. You already did. Not enough. Lucas shook his head. If you push too hard, they'll push back harder. You sound like you understand power. I understand backlash. A beat passed. You're not afraid, she asked. For myself? No. For your job? Your custody rights? That hit. He looked away toward the river. I've been through worse. She stepped closer again. Don't be noble, she said softly. It's expensive. Their eyes met. And something unspoken trembled between them. Not physical yet. Not desire exactly. Recognition of loneliness. Recognition of strength. Recognition of how easily the world misread both of them. Vivian reached out, hesitated, then let her fingers brush briefly against his wrist. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't calculated. It was human contact. Lucas felt the heat of it travel up his arm like a current. He did not pull away. You gave me breath, she said quietly. The least I can give you is honesty. And what does honesty look like for you? He asked. Her voice dropped. It looks like admitting my marriage has been over for years. The confession settled between them like falling snow. Does he know? Lucas asked. Yes. Then why stay? She held his gaze steadily. Optics. There it was again. He understood that word now. She searched his face carefully. You're not what they think, she said. Neither are you. The distance between them narrowed almost imperceptibly. Their breathing aligned. For a fleeting, dangerous second, the memory of that night flickered. His mouth on hers, life moving between them. This would be different. This would be chosen. Lucas stepped back first, a line drawn, not crossed. We shouldn't, he said quietly. I know. Neither moved farther away, because sometimes restraint creates more intimacy than surrender. After a long moment, she nodded once, regaining composure. I'll handle the board, she said, and the leak. You think it wasn't random? I know it wasn't. A flash of steel returned to her expression, the CEO reassembling herself. But that's my fight, she added, not yours. He studied her carefully. You almost died, he said. That part was mine. Their eyes locked again. A shared understanding passed between them, wordless, electric. This was no longer just about survival. It was about choice. Outside, snow continued falling over Chicago, quiet and relentless. Inside the darkened gallery, two people stood at the edge of something neither had planned. Neither had named. But both had begun to feel. And lines, carefully drawn for years, were starting to blur. Power rarely shouted. It adjusted lighting, it rearranged chairs, it whispered to the right people and let others do the shouting. Richard Sterling preferred it that way. On Monday morning, he stood before a row of microphones outside the federal courthouse, navy overcoat immaculate, expression carefully restrained. The press had not gathered for his wife, but they were eager enough to pivot. A reporter called out, Senator Sterling, any comment on the video involving your wife and the Stonewall employee? Richard paused just long enough to appear reluctant. My wife experienced a medical emergency, he said evenly. I'm grateful someone was there to assist. Assistant. He lowered his gaze briefly, as if swallowing something personal. But marriage, he added, like public service, requires trust. And transparency. He did not accuse, he implied. The clip ran on every major network by noon. Panels debated emotional boundaries and corporate ethics. Online commentators dissected body language as if it were forensic evidence. By 2 p.m., a financial blog published an anonymous source claiming that Vivian Sterling had been distracted for months and that executive morale was deteriorating. The source did not need to be named. Vivian watched the coverage from her office in Stonewall Tower, hands folded calmly on the desk. Across from her, Thomas Calder cleared his throat. The optics are worsening, he said carefully. Investors are nervous. Investors are always nervous, Vivian replied coolly. Thomas hesitated. Richard's statement this morning. My husband, she cut in, made no accusation. He didn't deny one either. There it was. Vivian leaned back in her chair. For years, she had understood that Richard's ambition required proximity to power. She had assumed they were aligned. Now she recognized the shift. He wasn't protecting her. He was repositioning himself. If the board believes I'm compromised, she said calmly, say it. No one did. Because none of them had proof of misconduct, only suggestion. And suggestion was more corrosive than fact. Across the city, Lucas Bennett sat at his kitchen table with a different kind of silence pressing in. Emily was at school. The apartment was too quiet. His phone buzzed with a notification from a news alert he hadn't subscribed to. Ex-firefighter at center of Sterling scandal, previously involved in fatal blaze. Lucas's stomach dropped. He opened the article. A photo of him in his old turnout gear filled the screen. Young, suit-streaked, eyes sharper than. The headline framed it as context. The body of the article framed it as suspicion. Sources indicate Lucas Bennett left the Chicago Fire Department following a tragic incident that resulted in the death of fellow firefighter Daniel Ortiz. Questions remain about procedural decisions made that night. Questions. The department had ruled the collapse unpredictable. Internal review cleared Lucas of misconduct. But the internet did not require official findings. It required doubt. Lucas's hands trembled slightly as he scrolled. A comment beneath the article read, "So the hero janitor couldn't save his partner, but managed to kiss a billionaire." He closed his eyes. The smell of smoke flooded his memory. Burning drywall, melted plastic, Danny's voice crackling over the radio. Bennett, pull back. He hadn't. He had gone deeper instead. And he had lived. Survivor's guilt was a quiet companion. Now it had been dragged into daylight and weaponized. His phone rang. Unknown number. He considered ignoring it. He answered. "Mr. Bennett," a male voice said smoothly. "This is Aaron Pike from Northbridge Communications. I represent Senator Sterling." Lucas's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" "We're aware the media is revisiting your firefighting history. We believe transparency benefits everyone involved." "Transparency?" Lucas echoed flatly. "A brief statement clarifying your relationship with Miss Sterling could ease speculation." "There is no relationship." A pause. "Then you should have no issue stating that on record." Lucas understood the subtext. "Distance yourself. Publicly. Erase ambiguity." "And if I don't?" he asked quietly. Another measured pause. "The internet can be unkind, especially regarding custody matters." Lucas's blood ran cold. "You're threatening my daughter?" "Of course not," Aaron replied smoothly. "Just advising caution." The line went dead. Lucas stared at the phone long after the call ended. It wasn't subtle anymore. This wasn't damage control. It was strategy. That evening, Vivian received an email forwarded anonymously. Attached was a transcript of the call between Northbridge Communications and Lucas Bennett. Her pulse remained steady as she read it, but something inside her hardened. Richard entered her office without knocking. "You've seen the firefighter piece?" he asked casually. "Yes. Unfortunate." She studied him across the desk. "Did you authorize Northbridge to contact him?" Richard didn't blink. "My team handles outreach." "That wasn't outreach," she said quietly. "It was coercion." He sighed lightly, as if he were being dramatic. "Vivian, this is politics. Collateral narratives must be managed. He saved my life, and now he's destabilizing mine." The words hung in the air like a slap. Vivian stood slowly. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "Destabilization?" Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You are vulnerable right now. The board senses it. Donors sense it. If there's even a whisper of impropriety, there isn't. There doesn't have to be." The honesty of that chilled her more than any lie. "You leaked it," she said. It wasn't a question. Richard's silence was confirmation enough. "For God's sake, Vivian," he said quietly. "It was a harmless clip. It would have faded." "Unless," she replied, voice sharp as glass, "it served a purpose." His gaze hardened. "You've always been brilliant at business," he said, "but naive about power. And you've always mistaken power for loyalty." The distance between them felt insurmountable now. He adjusted his cuffs. "This will pass," he said, "if you let it." "And if I don't?" He held her gaze evenly. "Then it escalates." Later that night, Lucas sat on the edge of Emily's bed as she slept, inhaler resting beside her pillow. He brushed hair from her forehead gently. The idea that someone would use her as leverage made his vision blur with controlled fury. He stood and walked to the window. Downtown Chicago glittered in the distance, beautiful, indifferent. His phone buzzed. This time, it was a text. "Vivian, I know what he did." Lucas stared at the screen. Another message appeared. "He contacted you." He hesitated before replying. "Yes." 3 dots. "I'm sorry." He exhaled slowly. "Don't be. Just don't let them near my daughter." The response came quickly. "They won't." He didn't ask how she could guarantee that. He sensed steel in her tone, the kind forged under pressure, the kind that didn't bend twice. Across the city, Richard Sterling stood alone in his study, watching a muted replay of the original video. He paused it at the moment Lucas leaned down. He didn't see CPR, he saw opportunity. And for the first time in his marriage, he underestimated his wife. Because Vivian Sterling had built an empire from grief, and grief, once awakened, was not easily intimidated. Outside, the wind howled against the glass towers again. The scandal was no longer accidental, it was tactical, and the next move would not be quiet. Temptation rarely announces itself. It lingers in doorways. It waits in pauses between words. It grows in the silence after midnight. Vivian Sterling stood barefoot in her penthouse kitchen, staring at the Chicago skyline through walls of glass. The city glittered with practiced indifference, every window holding someone else's secrets. Her marriage had become one of them. Richard hadn't come home again. He hadn't argued either. The absence of conflict was more damning than shouting. It meant detachment, strategy, withdrawal. On the marble counter lay a folder her private investigator had delivered that afternoon. Phone records, transfers, a pattern of meetings between Richard and Northbridge Communications before the leak. Proof, not of infidelity, of orchestration. She closed the folder slowly. Her marriage wasn't crumbling. It had already collapsed. The only thing left was the press release. Across town, Lucas sat at the small dining table helping Emily glue cotton balls onto a construction paper snowman. "Daddy," she said carefully, not looking up. "Are people still talking about you?" He didn't lie to her. Yes. Are you going to jail? He forced a smile. No, Peanut, I didn't do anything wrong. She nodded, trusting him. Children believed in absolutes. Adults survived in gray. After she went to bed, Lucas opened his laptop. A message waited in his inbox from an attorney representing Emily's maternal grandparents. Subject line: Custody Review Inquiry. His chest tightened. The email was polite, clinical. Given recent media exposure, they wished to revisit guardianship stability. He closed the laptop without responding. The threat Richard's team had implied was already moving on its own. He ran a hand over his face. Getting closer to Vivian now wasn't romantic risk. It was legal risk. He couldn't afford either. His phone buzzed. Vivian. Can you meet? He stared at the message for a long time. He typed. Where? They met at a quiet lakeside overlook north of the city. No cameras. No marble floors. Just wind and dark water stretching into night. Lucas arrived first. Vivian stepped out of a black sedan minutes later, dismissing the driver with a brief nod. She wore no makeup tonight. No heels. Just a long coat and her hair loose against the wind. You look tired, he said softly. So do you. They stood side by side facing the lake. For a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was crowded, with headlines, with consequences, with things neither dared say. He threatened your custody, she said finally. Yes. I have proof he orchestrated the leak. Lucas turned to look at her fully. Proof isn't protection. No, she admitted, but it's leverage. He exhaled slowly. I don't want leverage. What do you want? The question was too direct. He hesitated. Peace, he said. For my daughter. For myself. And if peace costs truth? He looked at her sharply. Is that what this is? He asked. A war? She didn't answer immediately. My marriage, she said instead, ended long before that night. Then why are you still wearing the ring? The words slipped out before he could soften them. Vivian looked down at her left hand. The diamond caught the city lights. Habit, she said quietly. Expectation. Fear of losing what I built. You built it, he said, not him. She stepped closer. You think leaving him won't look like confirmation? She asked. That the board won't connect it to you? There is no me, Lucas said firmly. The wind whipped harder off the lake. You're angry, she observed. I'm careful. She studied him in the dark. You felt something, she said. He didn't pretend not to understand. That night was survival, he replied. And the gallery? His silence was answer enough. Vivian stepped into his space now, close enough that warmth passed between them despite the cold. We didn't choose the video, she said softly, but we choose what happens next. His jaw tightened. You think this is romantic? He said quietly. It's not. It's dangerous. I'm not naive. No, he agreed. You're powerful, and power survives scandal. And you don't? My daughter doesn't. The words hung heavier than the wind. Vivian's expression shifted. Less CEO, more woman. I would never risk her, she said. You already have, he replied, not cruelly, just truthfully. The air between them crackled. He wasn't wrong. Being seen with her now was fuel for speculation, fuel for lawyers, fuel for Richard. She reached up slowly, deliberately, and touched his cheek. A simple gesture, not seduction, connection. Lucas closed his eyes for half a second. The warmth of her hand grounded and unmoved him at the same time. He could lean in. It would be easy. No cameras, no witnesses, just wind and need and weeks of suppressed tension. She rose slightly onto her toes, breath brushing his mouth. This isn't about scandal, she whispered. What is it about? He asked, voice rougher now. Feeling alive. The honesty of it undid something in him, because he understood that. He had felt dead for years after the fire. Alive only when Emily left. Alive, strangely, when Vivian gasped back to life beneath his hands. His fingers tightened at his sides. If we do this, he said quietly, it confirms everything. Only if we let it define us. He opened his eyes, the city lights reflected in hers. He leaned in, stopped. His forehead rested lightly against hers instead. Close, intimate, but not crossing. Your marriage, he said softly, needs to end because it's over, not because of me. Her breath hitched slightly. And you, he continued, deserve something that isn't built on fallout. She exhaled shakily. You're stronger than I am, she murmured. No, he said, I just have less to lose. That's not true. He pulled back gently. It is. For a moment, hurt flashed across her face. Not rejection, but recognition. She slipped the diamond ring off her finger. Not dramatically, not thrown into the lake, just removed. She held it in her palm, studying it like an artifact. I don't love him, she said quietly. Then that's your truth, Lucas replied. She closed her fist around the ring. And you? She asked. What about me? Do you feel nothing? He met her gaze fully now. Feeling isn't the problem. Silence fell again, heavy, real. He stepped back first this time. I can't be the reason you burn your life down, he said. And I can't keep pretending it isn't already ashes, she replied. They stood apart now, the tension unresolved but undeniable. Not a kiss, not betrayal, but closer than either of them had planned. The lake stretched endlessly behind them, dark and cold and honest. Vivian slid the ring into her coat pocket. A decision, not yet public. Lucas watched her carefully. The line had not been crossed, but it had been touched. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. The evidence arrived in 3 encrypted files and 1 mistake. Vivian Sterling had learned long ago that powerful men rarely fell because of morality. They fell because of arrogance. Richard's arrogance had left fingerprints. The private investigator she'd hired, a former federal prosecutor named Elaine Morris, sat across from Vivian in her office, sliding a tablet across the desk. "Metadata doesn't lie," Elaine said calmly. The original upload of the security footage was traced to a private server leased through a shell company. Vivian's gaze remained steady. "Owned by?" Elaine tapped the screen. "Northridge Communications. Timestamp 43 minutes after the incident." "And this?" Vivian asked, scrolling further. "A payment authorization," Elaine replied. "Consulting fee. Unusually large. Approved by Richard Sterling's campaign finance chair the morning after the leak." Vivian leaned back slowly. There it was. Not suspicion, not implication. Proof. Richard hadn't simply led the narrative spiral. He had engineered it. "Why?" Elaine asked gently. Vivian gave a humorless smile. "Because I was supposed to bend." She had always understood marriage as alliance, partnership, shared elevation. She had not realized it had become acquisition. Richard didn't want a wife. He wanted insulation. And when insulation cracked, he replaced it. "Are you prepared for what happens if you go public?" Elaine asked. Vivian looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, her skyline, the one she had fought to claim. "They already think I'm compromised," she said quietly. "At least this way, I choose the compromise." Lucas Bennett found out about the press conference from a push notification. Sterling to address media at 4 p.m. His stomach tightened. Emily sat at the kitchen table coloring, blissfully unaware of strategic warfare in tailored suits. He had not heard from Vivian since the lake. Only one message that morning. "It ends today." He turned on the television at 3:58. Stonewall Holdings logo filled the screen behind the podium. Reporters crowded shoulder to shoulder. Vivian stepped into frame precisely at 4 p.m. White blazer, no wedding ring. The absence was subtle but devastating. Her expression wasn't defensive, it was resolved. "Good afternoon," she began, voice steady and amplified across networks. "For the past week, speculation surrounding a medical emergency in my office has overshadowed the truth. Cameras flashed. My life was saved by a Stonewall employee performing CPR. A murmur rippled through the crowd. There was no affair, no impropriety, only intervention. A reporter shouted, 'Then who leaked the footage?' Vivian did not blink. I asked myself the same question. She paused just long enough to command full silence, and I have the answer." Across town, Richard stood frozen in his campaign office, watching. Vivian continued. "The footage was obtained and distributed through a communications firm retained by my husband's political campaign." Gasps erupted. She did not look shaken. "I have documentation confirming payment authorizations and server records tying the release directly to individuals within that campaign." Reporters erupted into overlapping questions. "Are you accusing your husband of leaking it?" "Yes," she said clearly. "No embellishment, no tremor, just fact. In an effort to manipulate public perception during his Senate bid, my medical crisis was reframed as moral failure." She let the words land. "My marriage has been over for some time. Today I am formally filing for divorce." The room exploded. Microphones leaned forward like predators. "Are you stepping down as CEO?" Vivian's gaze hardened slightly. "No." "Will the board investigate?" "They already are." "Did the employee know about this?" Her voice sharpened almost imperceptibly. He was a bystander to political ambition. At home, Lucas exhaled slowly. She had not said his name. She had not tied him to the drama. She had shielded him. Back at the podium, Vivian concluded. "I built Stonewall on principles of accountability. That includes myself. If the board believes my leadership is compromised, they may vote accordingly." A ripple of surprise moved through the press. She had just invited scrutiny, voluntarily. "But I will not allow corruption to masquerade as morality." The statement hit like a strike. She stepped away from the podium without answering further questions. No tears, no spectacle, just consequence. Within an hour, Richard Sterling's campaign issued a denial. Within 2 hours, investigative journalists confirmed the server records. By evening, 2 major donors withdrew support. By nightfall, hashtags shifted. Not Billionaire affair, but Sterling leak. Lucas turned off the television. His phone buzzed immediately. "Vivian, it's done." He tied back. "Are you okay?" The reply came after a longer pause than usual. "No." Honesty, raw and unfiltered, but I will be. He stared at the message. He imagined the weight of what she had just detonated. Marriage, public image, board confidence, all exposed. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time, he didn't hesitate. "Mr. Bennett," said a familiar, smooth voice. "Aaron Pye from Northbridge." Lucas said nothing. "Our firm is no longer representing Senator Sterling." Lucas almost laughed. "Convenient," he replied. "You'll find," Aaron continued, "that certain narratives are correcting themselves." "Good," Lucas said evenly. "Make sure they stay corrected." He ended the call. That night, Vivian returned to her penthouse alone. No husband, no campaign stuff, just silence. She removed her blazer slowly and set it aside. The city lights reflected off the glass walls. Her phone buzzed relentlessly with calls, board members, journalists, attorneys. She ignored them all. Instead, she walked to the kitchen counter and placed the diamond ring there. It looked smaller now, less symbolic, more transactional. She poured herself a glass of water, doctor's orders. No wine, no celebration, only clarity. Her phone vibrated again. Lucas. You didn't have to do that. She stared at the message, then replied. Yes, I did. Another pause. They'll come after you harder now, he wrote. Let them, she responded. And for the first time since the collapse, she felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Not relief, not victory. Alignment. The truth had cost her, but it had restored something deeper than reputation. Agency. Outside, Chicago pulsed with reaction. Markets would open tomorrow. Board votes would follow. Divorce filings would hit court records. But tonight, for the first time in years, Vivian Sterling stood in her own home without pretending. And across the city, Lucas Bennett realized something just as dangerous. He wasn't afraid of scandal anymore. He was afraid of how much he admired her. Scandal burns fast. Reputation burns slower. But truth? Truth smolders. It lingers in the walls long after the flames die down. 2 weeks after the press conference, Richard Sterling suspended his Senate campaign. The announcement came at 6 a.m., carefully worded, citing family matters and misleading narratives. By noon, federal investigators had opened a preliminary inquiry into campaign finance violations connected to Northbridge Communications. By evening, the donors who once toasted him at private fundraisers had stopped returning calls. Power, Vivian knew, did not disappear. It relocated. And Richard had nowhere left to relocate it. At Stonewall Holdings, the board voted, not to remove her permanently, but to appoint an interim CEO while the situation stabilized. The vote passed 7-4. Vivian accepted without argument. I built this company to outlast me, she said during the closed-door session. If stepping back protects it, I will step back. Some called it weakness, the markets called it stability. Privately, Thomas Calder approached her afterward. You could have fought harder, he said. I'm not fighting anymore, she replied calmly. I'm rebuilding. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but he would. Lucas Bennett returned to work the following Monday. The suspension had quietly lifted after internal review confirmed he followed emergency protocol. No apology, just reinstatement. He pushed his car through the executive lobby again, the marble floors reflecting the same chandeliers, the same illusion of permanence. But something had shifted. People looked at him differently now. Not with ridicule, not quite with respect, but with awareness. Security officer Mark Delaney avoided eye contact entirely. The investigation into the leak had reached him too. Consequences traveled in widening circles. Lucas didn't take satisfaction in that. He took inventory instead. Emily's custody review request had been formally withdrawn. Her grandparents, advised by their attorney, chose not to pursue a case that would invite media scrutiny into their own lives. Peace had returned to his apartment in quiet increments. Emily no longer came home with red eyes. The headlines had moved on. They always did. Vivian called him on a Thursday evening. Not from a private number, not through an assistant. Directly. Are you free? She asked. He hesitated only briefly. Yes. They met somewhere ordinary this time. A small coffee shop in Lincoln Park. No private gallery, no penthouse skyline. Just cheap ceramic mugs and indie music humming through speakers. She wore jeans. He wore his maintenance jacket. They looked like two people who belonged there. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply sat across from each other, the weight of everything unsaid settling between them. It's quieter now, she said. It is. She studied him carefully. I'm stepping down for 3 months, she added. Temporary leave. Voluntary? Yes. He nodded once. That's smart. A faint smile curved her mouth. I'm told I'm rarely described that way. You were never reckless, he said. Just surrounded. She let that settle. Outside, the couple laughed as they passed the window. Normal life. Unbothered. I keep thinking about that night, she admitted softly. The collapse? The part after, she clarified. When I woke up. He didn't interrupt. You look terrified, she said. Not for yourself. For me. I was, he replied simply. Why? The question was gentle, not confrontational. He took his time answering. Because I know what it's like to carry someone's death, he said quietly. And I didn't want to carry yours. Her throat tightened. And now? She asked. Now I don't want to carry you at all. The words might have sounded cruel from someone else. From him, they sounded different. She tilted her head slightly. Explain? I don't want to be the man who saved you, he said. Not anymore. Silence. I want to be the man who stands next to you, he continued. Or not at all. There it was. No hero complex, no rescue fantasy. Just equality. Vivian exhaled slowly, something inside her softening. For years, she said, men either feared me or tried to own me. I don't fear you, Lucas replied. And you don't try to own me. No. Another silence. But this one wasn't heavy. It was honest. She reached into her coat pocket and placed something small on the table between them. The diamond ring. Not as a dramatic gesture, not as bait, just acknowledgement. It's official, she said quietly. The divorce was filed this morning. He looked at the ring, then at her. How do you feel? Like a house after a fire, she admitted. Standing, but changed. He nodded slowly. I know that feeling. She met his gaze. So what do we do now? The question hung there, dangerous not because of scandal, but because of sincerity. Lucas leaned back slightly. We don't rush, he said. No grand gestures? No. No secret meetings? He smiled faintly. Coffee is fine. She laughed softly. And Emily? She asked carefully. She knows you, the lady I helped, he said. That's all she needs to know for now. Vivian absorbed that. I'd like to meet her, she said. Not demanding, just hopeful. Eventually, he replied. When it's steady. Steady? Not passionate? Not explosive? Steady. For a woman who had built empires on risk, it felt radical. She reached across the table this time, not hesitating, and took his hand. Publicly, in daylight. No cameras lurking. No desperation driving it. Just contact. He didn't pull away. He didn't lean in either. He held her hand the way someone holds something real. I don't need saving, she said quietly. I know. I don't need rescuing. I know. She squeezed his hand slightly. But I would like company. He smiled, small, genuine. That I can do. Outside, winter began loosening its grip on Chicago. Snow melted into slush along sidewalks. The river carried broken ice southward, relentless and calm. Richard Sterling would fade into legal proceedings and opinion columns. Stonewall would recover, market stabilizing under interim leadership. Vivian would return to her office, not diminished, but clarified. And Lucas would still work nights, still pack inhalers into backpacks, still carry scars no headline could fully rewrite. Their story did not begin with fantasy. It began with 8 seconds of borrowed breath. It continued with restraint, with truth, with consequences faced instead of avoided. After the fire, what remains is not smoke, it is structure. And sometimes, if rebuilt carefully, it is stronger than before.